Hi, I'm Lena Rao here. Welcome to Crunchweek, where we discuss the three most interesting and important stories from the week. You'll notice we're missing my colleague Colleen Taylor. She's away on vacation for the week, and I'm in AOL's office here in New York. But we have the amazing and talented Ryan Lawler, fellow writer here at TechCrunch, to join us. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi, everyone.
So we're going to go into what I think was a pretty big story for the week, which is the whole Instagram Twitter issues. I'm not sure if you saw this, Ryan, but basically Instagram turned off Twitter cards integration, which means that when an Instagram photo is posted to someone's Twitter feed, they wouldn't actually see the full photo. It just would sort of be this randomly cropped photo. Which is definitely kind of, it definitely alters the user experience when viewing Instagram photos on your Twitter feed. It was pretty controversial because it was a choice by Instagram to do this. And Kevin Systrom, Instagram's founder and CEO, talked about this actually like the day or hours after it was implemented at La Web, and he firmly believes that this was the right move, and basically why they wanted to do it was because they wanted to make sure that people were clicking through to the actual web presence, which they had just recently launched for the photograph. They really want the focus to be on that web presence. What do you think, Ryan?
Well, I mean, I think part of this also goes back to there was a lot of question just in general the way that Twitter is dealing with developers. And so this kind of goes back to some of the issues that they've been having. I think it's kind of interesting that now someone's pulling access to something from Twitter as opposed to the other way around with Twitter.
Tables have turned.
Yeah, exactly. But at the end of the day, the problem is that it's not a great user experience for anyone, right?
That's right.
The people that lose are the consumers, so that's the argument. I'm not sure I really agree with that, but I don't know. I mean, we had a post from, Michael Arrington, founder of TechCrunch,
Right.
God bless him, about how, users are getting screwed over and over and over. And I don't know if it's quite that severe. I think that this is kind of, tempest in a teapot, light tea kettle, whatever. I think it was kind of just way overblown personally, but then I'm not a big Instagram user, and I don't know, it didn't really affect me that much. I think it doesn't really affect users as much as it's being made out to.
Well, you have to kind of respect Instagram for wanting to be a platform on its own, and it has to make hard decisions, like what it's doing now to get people to go to its site and to look at photos on the site, as opposed to just scanning their Twitter feed, seeing the photo, and there's really not much more engagement past that. So I respect the company for trying to do what they're trying. The aim is because they want to create more engagement with a different part of the business. But it is kind of tough. I mean, what Mike wrote sort of rang true. I think with these decisions, sometimes people don't necessarily think about the users and what's easiest for the user.
Yeah, I just tend to disagree. I tend to think that if if the company wants to own the user experience and display things the way that they want to display it, that should be their prerogative. I mean, we're talking about free web services that anyone's able to do. I mean, and if you're just going to complain about a free web service, you kind of get what you pay for, right? I mean, that's the deal that you strike when you use it.
That's a really good point. Well, definitely, it's interesting because what was pointed out was that this was Kevin's decision, and it was like not really much influenced by Mark Zuckerberg, who is Kevin's boss over at
Right.
Facebook after Facebook acquired Instagram. And so, it was sort of interesting to see sort of Kevin now coming into his own and making these sort of important decisions that affect a lot of users. So, it seems like this is starting to go into effect, but who knows? Maybe there'll be some sort of resolution. We'll see what happens.
One final point that I find really fascinating about this is just that the focus is getting people to Instagram.com right? Whereas before, Instagram was so focused on the mobile experience, it was like almost like the web presence was like an afterthought, right? So I think it's kind of interesting that that's sort of that's the catalyst for this, is that we
Yeah.
want to get people to view things on Instagram.
Actually, like the mobile web, so
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
that's pretty interesting. Um,
So other story, which I wrote about, um, which was Uber this week. They sort of got a big win in Washington, D.C.,
yeah.
where they've had sort of a bit of backlash with regulators and the local government about their service. But they were able to get past that and work with the regulators, and the DC City Council unanimously agreed on a new regulatory framework, which would basically allow for Uber-like services, e-hail for sedans or whatever. So basically, they've always argued that their service was legal because all of their drivers are licensed and they work with licensed sedan services. But this sort of really puts a stamp on the fact, clears up any uncertainty that they're operating legally in DC, and they shouldn't really have any more problems there.
Yeah, so you've been covering the space a lot over the past few months. Do you think that this model is now going to be applied to, New York, Chicago, San Francisco? I mean, is this really do you think this is a turning point for Uber and sort of the regulatory bodies?
Well, I think Uber would like to think so, right? I mean, I think part of the issue when you talk about Uber is they were for a long time just seemed so immune to working with regulators. It was kind of almost like we're going to enter into a city, and then the regulators kind of have to let us operate, and that turned a lot of people off. It was very sort of a very cavalier attitude towards the whole process. So this showed a little bit of change just in the way that Uber is working with local governments. They're hiring lobbyists. They're going to industry conferences to sort of get in front of the local governments and regulators and actually work with them to ensure that they're operating legally. And I think what they'll do with DC is they'll show these regulations that were passed in DC and go city to city and say, look at what we accomplished here. Don't you want to use this as as a blueprint for your own regulations?
Well, and you have to think that this is also good news for companies like Lyft and Sidecar, who are also probably going to be facing, as they expand, these sort of regulatory issues as well, right?
Well, you'd think so, but the question is, it shows that the regulators are at least open to having the conversation. The question is, when Uber strikes this, and I wrote about this as well, when Uber strikes, not necessarily strikes a deal, but gets the regulators to sort of bend new regulations or create a new framework in that fashion, they're doing it with Uber in mind, and not necessarily with some of the other, sharing economy or tech startups in mind. So, I mean, the regulatory framework that was just passed clearly doesn't work for ride-sharing services like Lyft or Sidecar. So it actually could leave them at a disadvantage if the same regulations get applied elsewhere.
Well, one thing that's great for Uber, in terms of this DC ruling, is that maybe they're going to be their legal fees would be a little bit less as opposed to what they're probably incurring in San Francisco, Chicago, and everywhere else. So, which actually is a good segue into our next story, which was a startup that actually was able to win a pretty big lawsuit against a big player. So score one for the little guy. But basically what happened was TechForward, which basically created like a buyback program of sorts. This was a few years ago. They partnered with Best Buy, and to make a long story short, Best Buy allegedly stole their ideas after TechForward partnered with them, and had kind of revealed all their proprietary information about their program and the models and the finances and everything, and launched it a few months later, terminated their contract with TechForward. TechForward few years later actually won the lawsuit and won 27 million in damages, for basically over stolen trade secrets, which is like a huge deal for a little startup to actually be able to win a big lawsuit against multi-billion-dollar company. It's a big deal.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about this is just it shows sort of the danger of, startups sort of jumping through hoops and going over and above to try and win like one big contract, one big, marquee deal, because it's you invest so much in trying to get the tech integration right. The sales cycle is so long, and at the end of the day, there's no guarantee that they're not just going to steal your idea.
Right. I mean, it's so interesting because it was such a blatant case of, well, first of all, what happened was that it was so blatant that TechForward, once they saw that Best Buy, which actually they launched their new, product that very much resembled TechForward in a very public way. They had this big Super Bowl ad and had all these celebrities from like Justin Bieber to Ozzy Osbourne, kind of there to launch it in this commercial. But TechForward decided to sue Best Buy, but actually ran out of money and was forced to kind of disintegrate the company. They had to sell off some assets to a warranty company, Square Trade, and then they had to go and sort of do their own thing. I mean, the startup was essentially dissolved because they were spending so much money on legal fees. But the interesting thing was that the VC firms, First Round Capital and NEA, who had actually originally funded TechForward, came in and took on the legal fees because they really believed in it. And it just goes to show that with the right investors, I mean, it was just a really, really awesome thing to see.
Yeah, I think that's great. I thought that was interesting as well. That rather than just sort of dissolve the company, that even after they sold off the assets, TechForward's investors, kept the litigation, instead of just settling or deciding to not continue to pursue it. So
Yeah,
good
yeah,
for First Round and NEA.
exactly. I think that's a good way to close. Go startups, battle the big guys. But thanks so much, everyone, for joining us this week, and hopefully we'll be back next with Colleen and Ryan again.
All
Okay,
right. Thanks
thanks.
a lot. See ya.